Here to talk about that subject is our front bench. Former New Brunswick Liberal Premier Brian Gallant is with us. He's the CEO now of Space Canada. Former Conservative Deputy Leader Lisa Raitt is here. She's the Vice Chair and Managing Director of Global Investment Banking at CIBC. CTV News political analyst and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair is with us. And rounding us out this evening, the Toronto Star's Queen's Park Bureau Chief Rob Benzie is here. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. Benzie, I'll start with you because I'm sure you're working the phones like I am. I've heard that there is a growing schism or tension between Premier Ford as well as Premier Smith and Moe, obviously over the issue of how to fight back against these tariffs and the possibility of energy being either, there being an export tax applied or blocking any kind of exports. What is your sense of how this is going to play out tomorrow? I should say there's also like dueling press conferences now between the Prime Minister and the Premiers. Like, it's already not looking pretty.
Yeah, it's going to be messy tomorrow, and it's been messy since Trump was elected, basically, in November. And it's going to be messier yet after his inauguration on Monday. But the tension is palpable between Premier Smith in Alberta and Premier Ford in Ontario. And we could see that today on display when Dominic LeBlanc, the federal finance minister, was visiting Mr. Ford at Queen's Park. I asked him that question from the clip that you just played, Vassy. And it's clear to me that LeBlanc and Ford are on the same page in terms of wanting not to show our hand and not looking for carve-outs, whereas Premier Smith, who was, of course, down in Mar-a-Lago, kissing the ring on the weekend with her friend Kevin O'Leary at the president-elect's resort, saying, advocating for Alberta, which is, from her point of view, I understand that. But LeBlanc said today that all of the premiers basically need to be singing from the same song sheet because, if Trump can get a carve-out, if Alberta gets a carve-out for oil, they're pitting region against region, and that's not necessarily helpful. You shouldn't really tip your hand before you go into a negotiation, I think. That was his point, and Ford agrees.
Right. Brian, you've sat around the table at these before. In this instance in particular, I'm not sure we've ever kind of faced the prospect of this devastating a tariff that would necessitate, consideration of stuff that we wouldn't have thought out before. Like, how do you get premiers on the same page if they are so diametrically opposed on the issue of energy in particular, right? Like, it's not just Danielle Smith, I should say, like Andrew Furey in Newfoundland and Labrador, Legault over in Quebec, like none of them are comfortable with the idea of blocking energy exports. Premier Ford is the only one kind of leaving that open.
Yeah, to your question, I'm not sure you can. I don't foresee them leaving that meeting tomorrow and saying, okay, we're all on side with this position. I really think it's going to be probably a heated discussion, but I also think I've been, as you mentioned, around the table, and I think they're going to realize very quickly that they're not going to come to a consensus. So one of the things that could be done is certainly to try to find things that they do agree on. Now, the kind of, I guess, the consolation prize for them all, they're not going to end up deciding. It's obviously nice if they can come to a consensus together and share that with the federal government and say, look, we think these are the right suite of options that you should explore. But that doesn't mean that the federal government will have to take from those options. And if there is this sort of schism where something isn't on the table, the federal government may still decide to do it. It really is too bad, though, because Premier Smith, with her ties to the Trump administration, it could be helpful for Canada as a whole, and certainly can understand that you advocate for your province. But I think in advocating for your province, you realize that you're not in isolation. And if the country's economy just really completely tanks, it's going to impact you, even if you got a carve out. And really, there's a moment here for Doug Ford. I mean, he's the obviously premier of the largest province. He's the chair of the Council of the Federation. And there's a bit of a potential vacuum. We'll see what the Prime Minister does tomorrow, and maybe he can try to take that up. And he's got a great relationship with Minister LeBlanc, so that could be a good kind of duo going into Washington trying to make the points.
Yeah, or as Doug Ford, as everyone who stopped me in the streets over the last week has said, the new Prime Minister of Canada. Benzie and I are always talking about how many people in the last week have been kind of referencing that point. Lisa, Brian brings up the idea that the feds ultimately will have the final say, which draws us to another political quagmire. And that is that, like, people today I was speaking with in various provincial governments would prefer LeBlanc is the one who leads the discussions tomorrow. There isn't a whole lot of goodwill to the toward the Prime Minister at this point, given the sort of domestic politics at play right now as well. How challenging might that be tomorrow?
Well, it bears repeating. The reason why we're in this mess of a vacuum and the provinces all trying to run their own game plan in the United States is because of the decision of Justin Trudeau to do what he did just a week ago. I can't believe it's only been a week. I had to check my calendar because I feel like I've lived an entire 10 years in the last week. And trust me when I say that, I think it's going to continue at this pace going forward. But we are here because of the decisions that Justin Trudeau made. And I am still fully of the opinion that what a government really needs in this case is a mandate. They need to have a mandate. They certainly do not have a mandate. And they are talking to governments who are either wanting to seek a renewed mandate or one that just got a mandate in Alberta. And that makes it so much more difficult to put any kind of coherent position forward. I don't think it's appropriate that the province of Ontario suggests that the province of Alberta not send their oil and gas to the United States. I really don't think that's their call whatsoever, because quite frankly, sending the oil to the U.S. is a very different market where they can choose to go to Venezuela if they don't receive Canadian oil. But in the case of electricity going across the border, what other game in town are some of these places going to have in terms of power generation? You can't compare the two to one another. So it's one thing for Ontario to rattle their saber, but they have to have a completely different set of facts. In Alberta, that's what makes us a federation. I don't know who they're going to be meeting with tomorrow. I'm glad that they seem to like Dominic LeBlanc. That's fantastic for Dominic LeBlanc. But the reality is that we need a game plan, and we don't seem to have anyone who's going to be a legitimate quarterback because they don't have a playbook that's been endorsed by Canadians.
Well, the unfortunate part is, Tom, that all of that stuff, like all of this is playing out in public, right? I think, if you were to, rewind 6 years, there was way more of a lid kept on this because regardless of what you think of the government now, they were leading on the file then, and everybody seemed to be singing from a similar playbook. Now, to be fair, again, this is way, more drastic, the kind of tariffs that are being potentially imposed on us. But it just seems like everybody is talking out, saying the quiet part out loud to the detriment ultimately of our final negotiating position.
Extremely well said. But I also note Mr. Chrétien's excellent sortie over the weekend where he laid down markers, which was followed by a somewhat similar strong statement by Stephen Harper. To share with the folks watching us tonight, Vassy, La Presse newspaper last week had a really interesting cartoon of Doug Ford as Captain Canada, very buff and muscular, coming out of, showing his costume underneath. And it was a way of saying, good thing that we've got one person talking tough with regard to the Americans, and that was prior to Chrétien and prior to Harper, of course. So I do think that the average Canadian is so worried right now. I've talked to people in the business sector here in Quebec. They're extraordinarily worried. We talk about perhaps putting a stop on natural resources and energy from Alberta at the border, but good luck trying to do that with Hydro-Quebec's massive exports to Massachusetts and New York. So it's got to take into account those regional differences. And Doug Ford also, no question about it, is preparing for a campaign. Him giving a big bear hug to Dominic LeBlanc, a senior Liberal, makes it easier for him to talk to Liberals in Ontario and say, forget about Bonnie Crombie. I got this. I can work with you. And by the way, I talk to unions better than any Conservative before me. And forget about the NDP. I need a strong mandate. That, I think, is going to be his key pitch. And all of this plays into his hand.
Yeah.
Are you saying, Tom, that domestic politics are at play? What?